Kia ora, tēnā koutou katoa. Hello and welcome to this webinar hosted by Lutra. My name is Quentin Griffiths and I'll be the host of today's webinar. In this session we will be discussing the draft exposure of the Drinking Water Standard operational rules. Now before handing over to our panelists to introduce themselves, I just wanted to run through a couple of points before we start off. So firstly, a bit of a scheduling error on my part, so I would like to apologise to all Aucklanders, Ian included, about scheduling this webinar on a public holiday. For anyone who is trying to relax today, we are recording this and we'll be making it on demand later this week on our website, so you can always come back on and watch it then. Finally, I just want to remind everyone that the draft exposure is exactly that. It's a draft. This exposure is designed to give everyone a bit of a taste of what the rules may or may not look like, and they may differ slightly after public consultation. We also just want to make sure that it's clear that both Jason and Ian will be giving their personal opinions on this, not their Lutra opinions. Right, with that all out of the way, I'd like to hand over to Jason now to give a quick introduction to himself. Jason.
Thanks, Quentin. My name is Jason Colton. I'm the CE and founder here at Lutra. I was a member on the Ministry of Health's Technical Expert Group for Treatment and Distribution. I'm a current member on Te Mari Arohai's Technical Reference Group, and I led the drafting of the protozoa and bacteriological operational rules.
Excellent, thank you for that. And Ian.
Hi, my name's Iain Rabbitts. I'm a Principal Process Engineer here at Lutra. I was involved in the Havelock North public inquiry on an expert panel, providing opinion to the inquiry, and also I'm currently on the board of Water New Zealand. The conversation we're having today is our own opinions. I just want to emphasise that it doesn't reflect Water New Zealand or the public inquiry or anybody else. It's just our own opinions that we're expressing today.
Excellent. All right, let's get into this. So just before Christmas, Lutra released a blog on our website highlighting the top 45 need to know things about the draft exposure. Initially, we were going to go through that point by point and bore you all to tears, but we were actually inundated with questions, so we thought let's just dive into those instead. So to start things off, I might target this one more towards Jason. For those of you who don't know, we all know how Ian feels about chlorine. So, do the panel see a clear pathway to chlorine-free systems under the new regulations? Jason.
Well, in the operational rules, frankly, no. The operational rules are written for water suppliers who will be chlorinating or disinfecting with residual. So in terms of bacteriological compliance, it can be through chlorine, UV or ozone. In the distribution system, it's very much written for disinfection with chlorine or with residual. So the answer is simply no in the operational rules. In terms of the Water Services Bill, there are exemption criteria. Now these have not been fleshed out yet, so we kind of need to speculate about what they might look like. And I would speculate that that's going to be an independent panel of experts, probably international experts, and the burden of proof will be on the suppliers. So as a water supplier, if you did not want to disinfect with chlorine, you would have to prove to this independent panel that your water supply would be safe without chlorine. So, and if you can do that, then you'll get your exemption.
What's not clear though is what that exemption might look like. I mean, if you take Denmark, which is has chlorine-free water, their leakage rates are sort of 3%. All their reservoirs are stainless steel and they're inside buildings. Is that going to be what's required? I don't know. But there's a country that has an unchlorinated supply. At the conference a couple of years ago, there was a guy from Denmark came over and he gave a presentation and he was asked by a young engineer, given that we're the shaky Isles, do you think there should be a water supply? Do you think not chlorinating a water supply is a safe thing to do in New Zealand? He said no. That was the end of the answer. Basically, he just said no. Even he thinks we should chlorinate here.
Excellent. All right, Jen, thank you for that. Ian, this one's for you. Do you have any insights as to why these structural changes were made to the drinking water standards?
So primarily under the 2007 Act, it took the Health Drinking Water Amendment Act. It took 5 years to amend standards. I think it was 2 years of consultation and 3 years of notification, or it was the other way around. I can't remember, but it was a 5-year process. And the problem with doing that is it doesn't make it, it's very difficult to respond to changes in either new technologies or emerging pathogens. It's very difficult to respond to those in a meaningful way. So I think splitting off the standards, which are the MAVs, bacterial and chemical, biological and chemical, and radiological, splitting those off as the standards, and then having these operational procedures to comply means that those can be changed a lot quicker, and they can be changed to react to things that happen in the industry, either water quality issues or technology.
So I might jump in there. I think as a water supplier, hearing that things can change rapidly, operational rules and compliance requirements can change rapidly, is pretty scary. I think you want certainty for your long-term planning, capital investments. If you're putting money in now, you want this to be future-proof for 20, 25 years. So the fact that operational rules might be able to change, I think we need to be a little clearer. So emerging contaminants is one area. There are new technologies that we can't really predict in the next few years. We'll be able to write an operational rule for those. So yeah.
I think it's a good step forward. I think it makes it more responsive.
Yeah. So I would perhaps encourage Te Mati Aroha to provide a roadmap about any potential future changes they know about. I mean, one I can think of is viruses. What's the treatment of viruses going to be over the next sort of 5 years, say? I think too many changes now. They just didn't have time to do it. So what's a roadmap for the next 3, 5, 10 years?
Okay, excellent. Ian, sticking with you, how long will water suppliers have to enact these changes?
That's a very interesting question, because it's not clear in either the operational rules or the legislation, or the Water Services Bill that's before Parliament, how long that will be. But there's been some cabinet white papers that indicate up to 5 years for small supplies, and the larger supplies much sooner. Interesting enough, in the Water Services Bill, it's not an offence to not comply with the standards. It is an offence not to comply with the direction from Te Mati Aroha. That's in the bill at the moment. Obviously, that could change. But what that means is that how long it's going to take is up to Te Mati Aroha in some senses. It's up to the directions that they give to water suppliers.
Any extra comments here, Jason?
No, that sums that one up.
Okay, excellent. All right, Jason, can you tell us if any industry consultation has taken place to date in the production of these operational rules?
Yeah, okay. I mean, I mentioned at the top that I was a member of the technical reference group for Te Mati Aroha. So what I didn't mention is that all members of that group, and indeed the Ministry of Health group, had to sign NDAs. So I'm not at liberty to disclose the deliberations, discussions that have gone on within those groups. However, I did lead the production of the operational rules for bacteriological and protozoal, and with Te Mati Aroha's permission, we went out to industry for consultation. So approached representatives from large suppliers, small suppliers, equipment suppliers, and drinking water assessors. And so the drafts that we produced went through that group, and all the feedback from that group came back into those drafts, which we then submitted to Te Mati Aroha, which then went through the technical reference group. And other consultants, other industry bodies were used to prepare some of the other rules. ESR, for example, did the chemical compliance rules. So there was quite a wide sort of use of industry capability. And then Jim Graham had the unenviable task of trying to collate all those rules in a very short space of time. So I think Jim did an extraordinary job, but I do think you see the lack of time that was available to Jim in the current exposure draft, referencing errors and the rules. The numbering is not quite right. So I think that is a function of the time pressure that Jim was under, but I think it's the point of getting exposure draft out is to signal the intent, the direction that Te Mati Aroha is going in. There will be a full consultation round coming up next. So this will probably have a bit of a tickle up. And then there'll be a full consultation round. So I think it's really cool to get the exposure draft out so we can start to have these conversations. So as an industry, we can get ready for consultation and hopefully sort of go through that consultation process fairly rapidly, because we don't have a lot of time. These operational rules come into effect from 1st of July. So, we've got to get our skates on.
Yeah, exactly. All right, Ian, another one for you. Do you think the protozoa requirements for bores are appropriate when no one has found protozoa in a bore?
I suppose if you've found no evidence of bacterial of biological contamination within the bore, you've got a secure bore head. It's very deep. I kind of understand where it's coming from. So the rules, I think, if you're below 30 metres and you've had no E. coli or total coliforms for 3 years and you've got a secure bore head, then you don't have to provide treatment for protozoa. It's probably the one that makes me the most uncomfortable, but I understand where it's coming from. For shallower bores, 10 to 30 metres, you can reduce it to a 3-log requirement for protozoa if you can show, again, the water quality. And for bores below shallower than 10 metres or 10 metres and shallower, it's a 4-log requirement. So I think it's reasonable. I do feel that I'm not entirely happy with the lack of protozoa treatment on deep bores.
So just to clarify, I think it's for the shallower bores it's 4, and you can reduce it to 3. For the ones between 10 and 30, it's 3, and then for greater than 30, you can go from 3 to 0. Yeah. Right. So there were some late additions from Te Mare Arohai in the production of this exposure draft, some of which I don't agree with. The allocation of those numbers, the 10 and 30, I get the intent, I agree with the intent, but they're arbitrary. They won't stand up to any sort of scientific scrutiny, and they can be challenged. So that's a discussion that we as an industry are going to be having over the next sort of few months. 10 and 30 metres. Yeah.
Just make them all the same, make them all
required. Well, I mean, that's the discussion.
That's the debate, isn't it?
Yeah.
Excellent. Jason, sticking with you. What is the driver for moving to daily online compliance reporting?
Okay, daily online compliance reporting. So bacteriological has always been daily. It's the protozoa, which has been monthly since probably I think the 2000 standards, possibly 2005 standards. And there's not really any reason for doing that. And it makes it quite difficult, and has done as an operational compliance enforcement. As an operator, if you've got a filter, you're 22 days in of a compliance period, your cumulative compliance, can you track that? So it can be quite difficult. So moving to daily is a simplification. It means that all online compliance reporting now would be measured daily. That's midnight to midnight, and it makes the reporting, I think, easier. It makes the communication of the outcomes of that reporting easier. So for your customers, your consumers, I think a consumer can now look at a water supplier and see that they've been compliant for 365 of 365 days. That's easy for me to understand. They could look at a water supplier and say they've been compliant for 100 of 365 days. Some alarm bells going off. They've been compliant for 0 of 365 days. It's or 365 but you get my meaning, that it's quite a transparent way to report. So I think it's a necessary and a good practical simplification.
Excellent. Yeah, just providing a bit more clarity around that. Okay, Ian, this one's for you. Why is the chlorine CT 15 and not 6 as per the current drinking water standards?
So the original 6 milligram minutes per litre was CT was 0.2 milligrams per litre for 30 minutes. But where that came from, nobody's actually quite sure. We don't actually know where that number came from. 15 brings us in line with the World Health Organization. It brings us in line with the Australian Drinking Water Guidelines. It's still half of what the UK uses. The UK uses 30, which is obviously quite a lot more. With the change, we're not actually, if you've got 30 minutes contact time, you're not going from, it's only going from 0.2 to 0.5 out of the reservoir. And to be fair, there's not many supplies that are less than 0.5 now currently. So, I don't think this is a major change for us. It's just it's not likely that you're going to have to find more contact time. It's likely you're just going to need a slightly higher dose. So I don't see it as a major change, but it does bring us into line with the WHO. It does bring us into line with Australia. It's also 15 is defensible. It gives you about a 4 log reduction, depending on water temperature and the type of virus, but it does give you about a 4 log virus reduction as well. And there's a lot of literature supporting that sort of number, 15 milligram minutes per litre.
Okay, excellent, thank you.
Sorry, I might just jump in there and add
do.
that there are some suppliers out there that don't have 30 minutes of T10 contact time, and that's been a problem for them. So just a reminder that you can still use UV for bacteriological compliance, and then you just have to provide chlorine for residual disinfection. So there are mechanisms, you know, if 15 is too challenging with your current infrastructure, and you have UV, or potentially UV is the answer compared to putting in a larger contact tank. So there are some alternatives.
Okay. Excellent, thank you for that. Jason, why have we changed from 3-minute events to 15-minute events? This seems like a big relaxation of the drinking water standards. I guess you can call it a relaxation. So why? Well, perhaps the question is why do we have 3-minute events when no one else does? So in a should I say Kiwi fashion, we decided to take a few years ago to base our standards on the US EPA approach, and particularly around protozoa log treatment. But we decided to make it harder. Whereas in the US EPA, it's 15 minutes. So online monitoring is defined as a value every 15 minutes. So an event is a 15-minute event. The Australians followed that in their guidelines, so they have minute sampling and monitoring, but it's still a 15-minute event. So a 3-minute event really had no scientific basis, a risk basis. All the body of research that was done for US EPA supported sort of 15-minute events. So yes, it's a relaxation compared to where we were. I think it's a necessary and a practical relaxation. So that's why it's proposed. Excellent, thank you. Ian, this one's for you. I've got multiple sources feeding a particular site. Will I need to sample and do a source risk assessment for each source? If so, why can't I do a combined inlet sample?
So the simple answer is yes, you will have to do individual risk assessments for each source, and you'll have to sample each source. The danger with doing a combined sample is that if you've got a source that you're not using at that time, you might miss the risk in that source. So knowing what's happening in your sources is absolutely key to making sure your treatment's appropriate. And if you've got a source that you use only occasionally, you definitely need to know what that source does and how it responds to weather events and what have you. But it is really important to monitor each source, not just the combined source coming into the treatment plant for that reason.
Excellent, thank you. Jason, linking back to our discussions earlier on data, missing data has caused a lot of compliance issues for us. How will this be handled in the new rules?
Yeah, okay, so in the new rules there's really clear direction on what missing data is. And I think that's perhaps been lacking in the past. We've had differing responses, people getting pinged for really small amounts of missing data, whereas some people, perhaps getting away with it, not's the right word, but not being pinged for quite big chunks of missing data. So having consistency. Also knowing what you've got to achieve. So quite simply, it is if you have the data to demonstrate compliance, you're good. If you don't, you're not. So what that means in reality is you can have up to 72 minutes of data missing in a day, and or you can have up to 15 consecutive minutes missing. If you don't meet either of those requirements, then you are non-compliant and you have to produce an exception report. So it's quite simple now. And it's a target for people to plan and design to, in terms of their sort of data security, historians and the like.
Excellent. Ian, what are your thoughts on event-based sampling?
Event-based sampling, absolutely, I agree with it. I think it's a great thing. The problem we have here is that there was two issues in my mind. One is the event-based sampling that's listed in the exposure draft is only for chemicals, and I think it should be also for microbial, so total coliforms and E. coli. And the other thing is, what is an event? That is really not clear. The only thing I could think of as a guide now would be to say, if you look at the 6 principles of safe drinking water, change precedes contamination, I think is number 4. That sort of, the idea of that change being an event that you should monitor would be a guideline, but it would be awfully onerous, I think. And so I think we're looking for some guidance on what an event should be, and that needs to be clarified, I think.
So I'll say that I believe it's Te Mati Arohai's intent to provide a guideline document, just as there is with the current drinking water standards. So one would hope that the event-based sampling, the responses, the practicalities of it are all sort of fleshed out in there, because as it's written, I believe it's fairly impractical. It's a little contradictory. So I think it needs work.
Needs clarification.
Yeah, it does.
Okay, thank you, gents. Just a reminder for everyone on the call, we are starting to see some questions come through. Please keep them coming through. We'll address those shortly. But for the moment, Ian.
Yeah.
Since you're so good at these. Why is the amount of reticulation sampling required for large suppliers so high? It's going to be really expensive to implement.
It is. And I think depending on the size of the network and how many people it supplies, once you go up above 40,000, it's starting to go up very, very quickly. So you need a lot of supply, a lot of samples over the potentially daily. And I think the intention from Te Mati Arohai is to move to online sampling for chlorine and pH, so that you're getting a real live value of the chlorine, obviously chlorine and pH in the network. There are some challenges with that, location, how do you make them secure, how do you get the data out, power, those sorts of things that all need to be addressed. But I think the intention is to move to online sampling. The advantage of online sampling, obviously, is it's immediate. You get a response immediately, whereas with sampling daily, and you get continuous, so you're getting 40 and 40 readings a day. So you're getting an immediate response, you're getting a lot of data, and you can respond quickly to changes. Whereas if you rely on manual sampling from a point once a day, certainly for the biological sampling, it's 24 hours later. So whatever's happened a day ago, if you get a result. So that's really important. Having that instant information is very good. The other problem is if you're taking just a single sample, it's very, very hard, or it's much harder to detect trends. Because it's a spot sample, it's not as easy. Is it going to be expensive? Yes, it is going to be expensive. But I think the right level of biological sampling to get useful data from total coliforms, particularly, you're going to need to do a lot. You should be doing a lot of sampling. What that looks like, how much that is, I would suggest that we need to talk to the microbiologists on what is required around a network to get us a good picture.
I think I'll just add, if Te Mati Arohai are trying to drive towards online monitoring, which I think is a good thing, we really need to understand the practicalities of doing that. Ian touched on, getting power to sites, securing sites, getting data out. These are all sort of challenges, but also, if that's the intent, then there needs to be consideration of that, and that you've now got 1440 readings, so there will be some deviations, some exceptions. Again, so you talk about the events and the percentage compliance. At the moment, it's written as absolutes.
Yes.
So if that's the intent, there needs to be some clarification around that, because for those who've done it and tried it, online monitoring reticulation, it's challenging.
Excellent. All right, Jace, this one's for you. It's quite a mouthful, so I'm going to break this down in a second. But
okay.
The raw question is, for a small supply, I'm not clear what type of filtration I need to provide, and if I need UV or not. If I have UV, do I still need 30 minutes of contact time for chlorine? So if we break this down a little bit, first of all, what type of filtration do I need?
Okay, you need, I think, I understand your confusion, because personally I find the small supply section very confusing, contradictory. I think it's one of the sections that needs the most work. So I try to sketch out a little flowchart to help me sort of navigate the rules. And I think if you have a bore and you have online monitoring and your turbidity is less than 1, you do not need any filtration. If you have a bore and you have online monitoring and your turbidity is less than 1, if you have a bore with manual sampling, or if you have a surface water site or source, you need to add filtration. So the type of filtration depends on whether or not you have UV after it. So if you have UV, the turbidity you need is less than 5. If you do not have UV, the turbidity you need is less than 1. And then you have to disinfect with chlorine. So did that answer the 3 questions?
I believe so. So the second one was, do I need UV? And the last one was the 30-minute contact time. So 30-minute contact time still remaining.
Yeah, okay. So it's the combination of UV with the filtration, but also you have to provide chlorine. So you have to provide 30 minutes of contact time for the chlorine. So I think there are a few issues in there in what I've just said and those rules. So the fact that you can have a surface water source provide filtration to less than 1 NTU and chlorinate is sufficient is worrying. I don't think that's appropriate. So and also from an operational point of view, having to provide 30 minutes contact time if you're providing UV for bacteriological compliance is unnecessary, I think. So this section, this operational rule for small suppliers, I think needs work.
I think so. Thank you. Ian, we do membrane integrity tests for every 24 hour of production. This doesn't meet the new requirements. Why would we have to change this?
So if we throw our mind back to 2005, the wording in the 2005 standards was membrane integrity testing had to be done daily. And the intention was over a 24 hour, once every 24 hours, if the unit had been in service in that period, every 24 hours you had to do a membrane integrity test. Some of the suppliers challenged this, and they said, and a number of membrane plants around the country are programmed this way, that they do a membrane integrity test every 24 hours of running time. Now, the move to 24 hours, midnight to midnight, brings us in line with all the other reporting that we've got to do, the protozoa compliance, the chlorine disinfection, UV, everything is on a daily basis. So midnight to midnight. So all this is doing really is bringing the membrane integrity test in line with the rest of the standards. However, it's not just a standards change. There will be a number of plants around the country that will need to be reprogrammed for this membrane integrity test to happen every midnight to midnight, every 24 hours, midnight to midnight. So it's not a oh, we just changed it slightly, it won't be a problem. There will be some real costs that some councils, some water suppliers have as a result of this.
Yeah.
Thanks, sir. Thank you. Jason, we have HAAs, sum ratio as a P2. Is this still required? Okay,
so the HAA ratio has always been an interesting one. It's not in the main MAB tables in the current standards. It was somewhere at the back of the document, like hidden away, and for quite a while not many people realised it was there and had to achieve it. We all know that now, and quite a few people have that HAA MAV ratio as a P2. So the answer to the question is no. The WHO do not recommend that there is a MAV ratio for HAAs. That's for THMs. So the WHO recommend that actually they recommend that water suppliers should consider it. So it's appropriate to have it for THMs. It's never really been appropriate to have it for HAAs. So it's another one of those instances of us making things a little bit harder for ourselves. So the fact it's removed, I think, is again another practical change. And as for P2s generally, they've gone. There aren't P2s anymore. If you've had a look at the chemical compliance section, there are what we call typical values. So you have to do a series of tests over 12 months to benchmark your water quality for all those parameters. And if that gives you the typical values, and if they are above, well below 50% of the MAV, you have to sample them annually. If they're between 50% of the MAV or above 50% of the MAV, you have to sample them monthly. So it's treated quite differently. And there's also consideration to chemicals in the source water, as well as chemicals that get added through the treatment process or formed in the treatment process. So there's no P1s, P2s, P3s. It's just pure MAVs now. The sampling frequency and what you have to test for changes.
All right, excellent. Ian, this one's for you. Why do we have to have a pH of less than 8.5 at all times in distribution? We're often higher than this.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting number too, because the pH leaving the treatment plant is 8.0. So there's not consistency there. The other problem with the pH in the reticulation is it's actually very difficult to control. Once it's gone out the treatment plant, it kind of is what it is, and if it changes as it goes through the network, there's very little way of controlling it. So there's no at the moment the way it's written there, 8.5 is an absolute hard value. Again, there's no allowance for exceedance, and it is a problem. It's also a bigger question because I think when we're not sure what the intention of this is. If it's about stabilising the water and making it less aggressive so that it attacks, it doesn't dissolve fittings and add to contamination going through the network by an aggressive water doing its thing. Then we need to have a bigger conversation, because that's an astronomical cost if we're talking about stabilising water or putting an inhibitor in it to stop that sort of thing. It's something the UK's done, but it's a bigger question, and we need to have a bit more of a conversation, I think, about it, don't we?
So just for clarity, I think, so in the UK, the testing is done at the customer's tap. So the water supplier is responsible for water quality up to the tap. That includes household plumbing, so not just the Toby, it's up to the tap. So because there's a lot of old lead pipes, a lot of water suppliers have to add orthophosphoric acid. That's the inhibitor, the stabilizer that Ian's referring to. So it really is there is a huge cost to this. I mean, billions of dollars of capital and OPEX costs to stabilise water. So I think, as Ian says, we need to have a really frank conversation about what we're trying to achieve here. So in terms of pH leaving the treatment plant, I believe it's a little redundant if we're doing it from a bacteriological point of view, because we have the CT, which includes FACE. So we have a high pH to disinfection, we get a low FACE, we can't meet our CT. So we're managed there. I think there's an intent to prevent some of the, I'm sure we all know stories of small plants with hypo going out of control and really high pHs going out the door. I think having a pH limit to control those is appropriate, but with an allowance for deviations, again, not an absolute value. So in retic, as you say, unless we're stabilising pH at the plant, which is lime, CO2, big cost, then
dollars are going up all the time.
Dollars are going up. So what is this conversation that we're having here? Because in reticulation, we're not disinfecting necessarily in reticulation. We're preventing recontamination. So the provisions for high pH in reticulation were dropped out of the 2015 standards. So we seem to be sort of going back. So let's be clear about what's been trying to achieve here, and let's have a conversation about it. Because the costs are astronomical. I'm not saying it's inappropriate, to actually have a stable water going out rather than the soft aggressive waters that we have going out of most plants. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but there's a huge cost to it.
Yeah, and we might have more things we need to focus on first before we go down that route. So
yeah,
excellent. Jason, this one's for you. So these changes are going to require a big change to how we can report compliance. You guys do our compliance reporting, so can you give an indication of the effort involved?
Yeah, So I mean, it is. There's quite a lot of changes, moving from daily, from 3 minutes to 15 minutes. These are all changes to how we report compliance. I think perhaps the bigger one was the CT, the change to CT, just over a year and a half ago. There's a lot of maths involved in that, and actually getting the CT values right, the baffle factors, whether to use flow in, flow out. There's more complexity around that. But I think on our platform, infrastructure data, we cover roughly 2/3 of the connected population. It's a week's worth of effort for us to do everyone. That's setting up the reports, doing the test data sets, validating, and then sort of producing them. So what we intend to do is have them up and ready a month, 2-3 months in advance, depending on when they're finalised. So we've got templates now, but until these rules are finalised, we can't really go live with them. So we get the final versions, we validate them, we publish them. So we'll have them running in parallel with the existing compliance reports well in advance. And then 1st of July, we just turn off the old ones and we're away. And that'll be free, by the way, for our customers. So a little plug there.
Easy. Checks in the mail. Great question. All right, so this question's targeted both of you, but Ian, I'll get your opinion first. What changes do you both think will have the biggest impact on the industry?
So for me, there's two. The removal of the secure bore status. Hooray! It's gone. Great. That's going to have a massive impact in some of my favourite places in New Zealand. The other one is the mandatory chlorination, and I think those two together probably do more for public health than any of the other changes. I guess those are my two big ones.
Mandatory disinfection with residual.
Sorry, thank you. Mandatory disinfection with residual. I'm not allowed to call it chlorination.
I think those two absolutely. I think also perhaps the move to online compliance for bacteriological. I think it's going to produce a step change in water quality and water safety. For me.
Excellent. Thank you both. Jason, since you're on the committee, can you tell us what reference material has been used in preparing the operational rules? It's hard to tell as there's no preamble to the draft exposure.
Yeah, that was a requirement of Te Mare Arrow High that that material will be in the guideline document. So they wanted a really lean approach to operational rules and plain speak, no ambiguity, no sort of cross-referencing. So to try and make it as clear as possible for water suppliers. Yeah, it was all about sort of plain speak. So that's why there's no sort of preamble in those operational rules, or very minimal sort of preamble. So one would hope to see that in the guideline material. In terms of the referencing, it's hopefully the ones you'd expect. It's the World Health Organization, the US EPA, the Australian guidelines, and then UK guidelines, typically in that order of priority. So that's where basically most of the referencing is from.
Okay, thank you for that. We have a question from the audience, and Jason, I'll target this one at you first, but Ian will come to you second. Can the panelists speculate on the sorts of criteria that will be needed for a chlorine-free exemption?
Oh. Well, we can certainly speculate. The sort of criteria, Ian I think touched on the Danish example. It's those leakage rates, it's zone pressure controls. I mean, it's really very careful management of the reticulation system. Hygiene. I mean, there are a lot of rules now, new rules around operational practices.
Yes.
For cleaning reservoirs, for doing work on pipelines. It's about having properly trained, qualified people doing it. So that stuff stands whether or not you're disinfecting or not.
Yeah.
But it's all part of the toolbox that you need. Another part for me is about the biological stability of the water. I think you need to have the stable dissolved organics and really, really, really low dissolved organics. So again, it's kind of more treatment at the plants for surface waters in particular. But I guess really we're talking about groundwaters here. I think that would be going sort of non-chlorinated. So I think, and having track record and history, having the right personnel, the training, it's all that. Ian?
I think so the obvious things are things like leakage rates. The total coliforms are going to be huge. If you want to do that, you really have to have zero through the network. Or if you do have them, you need to track them down really, really quickly. I think the maintenance and response to problems has to be infinitely better than we do now. So it's not just leakage rates and protecting reservoirs, making sure you haven't got any chili. There's a whole bunch of other operational things that will go on as part of that. And I really wouldn't like to speculate on what all those would be. But I mean, if you go to, if you go and look at some of the unchlorinated supplies and look at the cost of their water and the amount of treatment they have to get to that point and the quality of their networks, I think we're quite a long way away here. Anywhere in the country, I think we're a long way away from that. The other thing that we've got to add into here is we're in a geologically active area, and that has an impact on our networks. I was looking at a bore recently the other week that every time there's an earthquake in Kaikoura, there's a bore in Auckland that responds with a high turbidity peak. Well, Raglan has a huge turbidity peak, which might last for 3 or 4 days. So it's very, very difficult for us to say what those requirements might look like here in Aotearoa.
Excellent. Right, we've got another question coming through from the audience. Sorry, just give me everything. Okay, I have a small supply groundwater source supplying 2 properties directly with no reticulation. What sort of treatment would I need, and is chlorine required?
Oh, I guess that depends on your source type, which isn't specified in the.
So groundwater
So
source.
it was specified.
Yes,
I should really listen to the question. So it's a groundwater source. So with 2 houses, I don't imagine you've got online turbidity monitoring, which means you get pushed to filtration and disinfection. So will you need UV? It depends what filtration you put in. If you can put filtration in that gets you to less than 1 NTU, then you just need to chlorinate. Again, I mentioned that I don't think that's appropriate.
No.
Well, even on the groundwater perhaps, but surface water no. But so yeah. Alternatively, you can put a UV in, and you need a less robust filtration process, but you still need chlorine. So you're looking at multi-barrier treatment for 2 houses. Yeah, I mean the least you could get away with, from my reading of the current small water system, is filtration and chlorination.
I think we both agree that we'd like to see, depending on if it's surface water, you'd want to have a bore. But in terms of the legislation, 2 houses is a water supply. Doesn't matter whether there's any reticulation or not; it's a water supply. So you would fall under the remit, and yeah, you'd need that treatment. In terms of what we think needs to be in the small water supplies, that needs to be. We need to develop that, as Jason said, a bit more and work out exactly what's the minimum level.
It also, for you, it means water safety plans and source water quality risk assessment plans. So there's quite a bit. Now the criteria for those have not been produced or released by Te Mani Arawai yet. So our understanding is that the requirements for smaller suppliers and very small suppliers like yourself are going to be far less onerous than for larger suppliers. But nevertheless, you still have to go through that risk management process.
Excellent. Jace, this is probably more one for you. When do we expect the guideline document to be released?
That's a really good question. I honestly don't know. We've had no indication from Te Mani Arawai about that. I don't think they've even started it. To be honest, the focus is on getting operational rules out. Other resources at Te Mani Arawai have been focusing on getting the water safety planning framework and guidance material out. So their Sauron like gaze will sort of switch to this next. I think the guidelines will be next cab off the rank. You'd hope they're well in advance of 1st of July, but I guess I fear they might be coming out in May, June. Yeah, so no guidance yet on the guidance.
No guidance
on the guidance.
Excellent. All right, this is for you both to respond to. Can the panelists comment on the consideration of viruses in the draft?
Yes. Again, I touched on the fact that I'm not able to discuss the deliberations of the Te Mani Arawai reference group, but I would say I did go into that group expecting more to deal with viruses, basically, to have an operation rules around viruses and to treat viruses. I've used the water services approach in Australia. It's health-based targets, but they basically do a source water assessment and a log credits for bacteria, for viruses and protozoa. I think that's probably the appropriate way for us to go, but it was all too much too soon. So I think what you see with the operational rules and standards as they are, there was only so much time, there's only so much change that can be accommodated in that time. So it's one of those things where I also said I would like to see a roadmap of what might be coming, particularly around viruses.
Yeah, I think the move to 15 milligram minutes per litre for CT is whilst it's in the BACTO compliance apart is actually very good for viruses. As I said, it gives you, depending on the temperature and the virus, it can give you about four log reduction of the viruses. Some of the harder to kill viruses like adenovirus and stuff, you know, they're pretty immune to UV. Well, not immune, but they're pretty resistant to UV, and so they can be harder to kill for sure.
Excellent. Do you think backflow devices are likely to be a requirement for residual-free exemption for a network?
Yes.
Well, I think they're a requirement for a chlorinated network, depending on you know, for high risk, well, higher risk users. Do I think you need them on every household? No, but there's normally a check valve in the Toby, isn't there?
Yes.
Yes, normally a check valve in the Toby. So whilst it's not a backflow, I always get that struggle with that backflow preventer. It is, you know, it is a protection. But I think it's whether you have chlorine or not, you need backflow prevention. It's just part of the running a secure network.
Yeah, I think the question was perhaps on, I may be interpreting, but on every property as opposed to higher risk properties or larger properties.
I wouldn't like to speculate. I wouldn't like to speculate.
I'll leave that to be a backflow expert.
No, I'd leave that for the really clever people on this evaluation panel. Yeah.
All right, so just checking for any more questions. Looks like those are all the sort of audience questions we have at the moment. So if you have any more, fire them through now. Otherwise, last chance. I have one more for you, Jason. You mentioned a few changes that you don't agree with. Can you tell us what they are?
I think we've touched on a couple of them. We talked about pH at the treatment plant, and I think whilst I don't have a problem with the intent of the pH limits, I think there needs to be more thought about the practicality of them. You need to put allowance for a deviation, whether it's a 15-minute event or a % compliance, because you know, lime dosing systems, lime flushing, we have pH deviations. I think if the intent is going to be corrosion, then that's a different conversation. But from a bacteriological point of view, I think I don't certainly agree with that pH addition. So I think the addition of an FACE clause, there's an absolute on FACE. You cannot have a minimum less than, I think it was 0.3. As an absolute, that was a late addition which I don't agree with. I think the FACE requirement there is redundant because we've got FACE in the C10. In the CT. That sort of makes it redundant. And also it was expressed as an absolute.
Yes.
So again, you know, you can't use.
You've got to have your 15 minutes or your 72
so,
minutes.
I think the other ones we've kind of touched on. There was the somewhat arbitrary nature of the 10 meters, 30 meters. So those were the key ones for me.
Okay, excellent. We have had one correction come through from the audience.
Oops.
In the sense that Te Mata Arawai cannot consult on the drinking water standards until the services bill has gone through select committee.
Right.
Yeah, so it has not consulted. Again, my clarification. So Lutra, I went to consult to help draft those rules that came into that then went to the through the process. So it's not Te Mata Arawai consulting.
No. Okay, excellent. Look, that's it from the questions from the audience. So unless anyone else has any more, you know, feel free to fire them through in the next sort of half second or so.
Good man.
Yeah.
But otherwise, look, thank you everyone. Thank you everyone for taking the time during lunch hours to join us. Anyone from Auckland, nice effort. I like the dedication to come on holiday and listen to us ramble on for 40 odd minutes. So look, thank you everyone. Keep an eye on our LinkedIn. We will be posting this on demand. We'll also have some other webinars coming up which might be of interest around these types of topics in the near future. So keep an eye on, follow it, and we'll keep you updated with what's going on. But for now, thank you very much.
Cheers.
Cheers.
All right. Thanks all.